It is hard to describe some weeks how giddy excited I get to get up and share with you each week. And I don't know if you know what that feels like, but to feel like you have a mission that is worth something. And I'm really hoping that the message I have to share with you today is a blessing that makes your load lighter and gives you a little bit of direction. I'm curious, one of the things that impacted the message for me was I got to take a break. I have a day every year of like the most awful medical test. I dread it. Kristen goes with me. They stick me in an MRI, and some years they do a heart stress test on my heart while I'm in this tiny tunnel, and I want to scream, but you can't, or they'll start over and make you do it again. So I get through it, and I decided I was going to surprise Kristen, and we would have a treat. And we went to see Les Miz. Anybody get to see it while it was in town? The greatest musical of all time. Only a few of us. It needs to come back, right? I'm so glad you guys went. And literally, it was one of those days. We get there, and I mean, Houston, we're the fourth largest city in the United States, right? And every now and then, does anybody have a moment where it feels like a small town? I sat down in my seats, and guess who was 10 rows in front of me? Without me knowing, I looked forward, and my mom, and I've got a photo. Are you guys with me? I literally sit, and 10 rows in front of me are my parents. I'm in Houston, Texas. Like, it's a massive theater. And there was this sense, even as I sat down, right? And if you haven't been to Les Mis, this is what you need to know. What you need to know is that it's better than a church service. And I think church services are pretty great, by the way. I get to watch your kids dance and sing, and beautiful things happen. But the thing that I'm excited to tell you about today is what you see in Les Mis. There is this moment where Jesus steps into the middle of the story. And the reason it's the greatest musical of all times is because there's a moment that's such profound grace that people that don't know God or know God go, there must be a God. Because that kind of grace would change if you got something you didn't deserve, right? And we're shown a grace that totally changed your life. And what happens in Les Mis is this character, Jean Valjean, has been imprisoned for stealing bread for I think it's his nephew. And after he's released from years of service in prison camp, he can't work because he's branded as a convict. And he's sleeping in the streets when a bishop encounters him, right? And when this bishop encounters him, it's this moment. And you feel it in the theater. Literally, Kristen had never seen it before. And she's already like, I'm weeping before it happens. Because this priest sees Jean Valjean sleeping in the streets, and he invites him in. Everyone else was pushing him away. They wouldn't work with him. They wouldn't touch him. They didn't want anything to do with him. And this priest says, right, come inside, for you are weary. Anybody remember this? And the night is cold out there. What's he say? It's so good. Though our lives, this is my favorite part. Though our lives are very humble, what we have to share. Is that a sermon all by itself, right? He said, there is wine here to revive you. There is bread to make you strong. There's a bed to rest till morning. Rest from pain and rest from wrong. And then you realize in the musical what's happening, right? He's invited him to rest from wrong, and Jean Valjean does the one thing he should never do. And there's a part of you that's watching it thinking, I've also done the one thing I should never do. And he takes, the story in the novel is much more in depth, but what we know is this bishop has committed basically to a life of poverty, but he came from a wealthy family, and the one thing he carries over is this amazing silver that they ate from at the table. And Jean Valjean holds the silver, and he realizes, like, this is worth a fortune. I could never work enough to buy something like this. And in the middle of the night, he steals the silver from the man showing him Christ-like kindness. And of course, he's captured, right? And they bring him and they throw him in front of the priest, right? This is the moment that you're just like, could anyone actually do this? And they say, we caught him and he has your silver. And he has the audacity to say that you gave it to him. And the bishop turns, right, and says, for the man has spoken true. You may, and he even says, I'll throw in, you forgot these 2 candelabras, right? These other 2 massive pieces of silver. And he gives them to him. Right? And he says to the officer, I commend you for your duty. May God's blessings go with you. And then he speaks these words, he sings these words over Jean Valjean, right? He says, you must use this precious silver to become an honest man. By the witness of the martyr, by the passion and the blood, God has raised you out of darkness. And he says these words, and every time I lose, I have saved your soul for God. And the whole story changes. Because this guy met the real Jesus. He met the Jesus that says, like, you don't have to deserve grace. I just give it to you. And even when you do the wrong thing, and this is what I want to invite you to today. Sean and I have been in a series on the Bible, and some of you are like, I would like to be fired up about the Bible the way that you guys are fired up about the Bible, but I don't necessarily get it. And one of the reasons is that the star of the Bible, by the way, is Jesus. The reason the Bible's amazing, 100%, it's all about Jesus. That's what makes the Bible amazing. And by the way, it's also what makes it less confusing. And when you encounter the real Jesus, this is the sad part. When I see that musical, I'm like, that's who Jesus is. But for many of us, we encountered a Jesus, and the subconscious message for us was, I better perform or Jesus is going to reject me. If something goes wrong, it's because I did something wrong. It's the opposite of the message of Jesus. And what I want to remind you of today is that there are places that you've heard the wrong message and you've encountered the wrong Jesus, and that's not Jesus. Actually, by the way, this book of Revelation, that's not a prophetic book about the future. It's just not. We'll go through it sometime together. There's this Antichrist, and it's not a figure of, like, I grew up in a church and they were like, it's going to be, Vladimir Putin, or who was the leader that had a Gorbachev had a birthmark, and for sure that was the mark of the beast. It was his birthmark on Gorbachev. And listen, the Antichrist are the people that say the opposite of Christ. So you know who says the opposite of Christ? There's this voice, and we're going to talk more about it in the sermon, that tells you you're not good enough, that tells you it's about your performance. And the real Jesus, when you encounter him, will be like the bishop to Jean Valjean, who says, you did the wrong thing, and you're going to be shown grace anyway, and it's going to change your life if you let it. And the great part of that story is that that grace changes the life of that character. And I believe for each of us, when we encounter the real Jesus, that's what happens. So who is the real Jesus, right? And by the way, the thing that makes the Bible reading the Bible safe and makes it work is that we have the benefit now. I told you the first week of this series, the Bible exists because of an event. Everybody remembers what the event is, right? Pretend like you listen to my sermons and tell me. What's the event? The resurrection. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm successful. That is the best feeling ever when you remember something that I preached. The event was the resurrection. When the resurrection happened, all these people were like, we better start writing this down. Like, this is a big deal. This has never happened before. This is a different story than we thought it was, and we need to record it. And that's why the Bible came into being. And what we would call the Old Testament were a collection of scrolls that were important to the Jewish people, and they're important for us to know the story. But when you pick up the Bible, it doesn't all carry the same weight. It speaks from different places, and it was put together and written, again, by humans. And I'm telling you all this to tell you this. Everything you read in the Bible, if you read the Bible well, you will translate that, you will see it, you will understand it through the lens of Jesus. So there are going to be passages in the Bible that you have to go, like, I don't know what that means, right? Or I had somebody come up to me last week and just say, like, God told people to kill babies, right? I'm like, no, he didn't. I promise you he didn't. But there are places in the Bible where anybody ever been broken up with, and the person you broke up with, you said, God told me to do this. Anybody ever have one of those, like, I'm breaking up with you because of God? And you're like, is it not because you saw this other guy and he was much better looking and more successful than me? It was God. I promise, it was God. Anybody ever blame something you did on God and later on you figured out, like, maybe that wasn't God? The story of the Bible has places where people think they did the right thing for God, but just like today, we don't always do the right thing for God. Sometimes we do the wrong thing for God, and we write it down and we kind of blame it on God, but it wasn't God. If you want to know what God does and what God thinks and what God believes, if you want to see what God believes about violence, look at Jesus. Jesus will help you fully understand what God believes about violence. And he was so against violence that he endured the most violent and brutal crucifixion with zero retaliation. So the second thing you need to know, I got a few things I want to tell you. It's all about Jesus. And Jesus, by the way, is never violent or coercive. You won't find a place in the Bible where Jesus is violent or coercive. In fact, Jesus is just the opposite. Jesus is always inviting us in to something different. Now, but if you're like me, maybe you grew up in a church where it was very coercive. And one of the ways that you thought, I don't know why this happened this way, but people thought like the best way to get people to follow Jesus is to scare them. Anybody actually been to one of these Halloween houses that they scare literally the hell out of you? It's like, here's hell, you don't want to go there. Anybody been to, when I was young, we would watch, I will never forget in all my life. We watched these awful films about the rapture. By the way, the rapture's not in the Bible. We can talk about it later, but you won't find it. Find it, tell me where it is, and I'll let you know. It's not in there. But there's a whole film about and then everybody that gets left behind that didn't love Jesus, right? And then you remember in this film, I think it was called Mark of the Beast, actually. All the people left behind get brought to the guillotines, and we're watching this film, and their heads are getting chopped off, right? And I kid you not, the youth pastor after the film said, if you don't want to have your head chopped off, you could choose to follow Jesus today, right? And you just went like, are you kidding me? Like, is this really the way to this? It can't be. It can't be. And Ecclesia, I got to tell you, it's just not. That's not Jesus. There's nothing coercive. There's nothing shame-based about the way. Jesus' invitation is open. In fact, he kind of goes like, it's a narrow road. It's a hard road. It's a beautiful road. It's a good road. It's a road that will mean picking up your own cross and embracing suffering and a different kind of life. There is no place that Jesus uses coercion or violence in those ways. And all I can tell you is that what we have to learn to do is let some of that go. And I'm going to invite you into a process for this later, but my guess is that many of us need a process to re-examine ourselves and Jesus in a new light based on I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and it was talking about some of the damage done. People were telling stories of some of the damage done in churches that use coercion and fear and shame in the purity culture, right? And ironically, I didn't ever see this one in particular, but I saw some pretty weird ones. And the story was that this young girl was in a Bible study in her church, and the Bible study leader showed up. I can't believe I'm telling you this story. It wasn't in the sermon, but it is now. She showed up with a plate of brownies, and she said, "Who wants brownies?" And everybody wanted brownies. Kids, right? And then she went as some kind of awful object lesson, and she took the knife she was using to cut the brownies, and she dragged it through dog poop in their yard. And then she used it to cut the brownies, and she said, "Who would like brownies now?" Right? And no one wanted brownies. And the inference was that if you're impure, no one will want you either. And I got to tell you, Ecclesia, I tell you this story only to tell you, like, some of us actually still believe some weird stuff like that. Like something held on from a weird teaching or about, and I just got to tell you, like everyone, like we're all impure, we're all broken, we're all flawed, right? And in that flawed nature, guess who wants you? Jesus wants you. The people in this room want you. And we want to find a place we can belong together. And by the way, there is nothing you can do that will damage you to the place that Jesus doesn't love you. We just sang about it. It's all in the Bible. Don't ever forget it. Jesus is never violent or coercive. In fact, Philip Yancey says it really well this way in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew. He's talking about this reality, and this is what you need to know. Jesus was not about power, right? In fact, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, their mom, come to Jesus when he starts to serve, and she comes saying, like, when you come into power, what roles will they have? Will he be the Secretary of State, and he'll be the Secretary of Defense? Like, who gets what? And Jesus was going, you don't get it. And he kept saying, will they drink of the cup that I'm going to drink of? Because the cup I'm going to drink of, the one we'll take at communion, it's a cup like our lives. It's filled with joy and with sorrow. I'm not going after a kingdom of power. Yancey says it this way. He says, power, no matter how well intentioned, tends to cause suffering. Love, on the other hand, being vulnerable, absorbs it. In a point of convergence on a hill called Calvary, God renounced the one for the sake of the other. Jesus is not coercive or violent. In fact, what you need to know is that Jesus offers the opposite, the ultimate in vulnerability. In Luke 10, there's this amazing passage, and Jesus has gathered his disciples, and he's going to send them out to actually start to do ministry. And this is what he tells them. He said, the Lord then recruited and deployed 70 more disciples, and he sent them in teams of 2. This is like their first mission. I've been teaching you, I've been training you. Now you're going to go share the good news of the kingdom of God with people. In teams of 2 to visit all the towns and settlements between them and Jerusalem. And this is what he ordered. Jesus said this. This is his big pep talk before they start the mission of Jesus. He says there's a great harvest waiting in the fields, but there aren't many good workers to harvest it. Anybody heard that passage before? It was like, let's get to work. Pray that the harvest master will send out good workers to the fields. And then Jesus says this, it's time for you to go. I'm sending you out armed. Armed is like a sword, right? He says you're going to be armed with vulnerability. He says, you're like lambs walking into a pack of wolves. This is Jesus' pregame speech. It's the worst speech ever given by anyone. He says, literally, you are going to be slaughtered. He said, this is what he's saying, you're going to get hurt. You're going to go out and share my love, and you're going to get hurt. And then he tells them, don't bring a wallet, don't carry a backpack. I don't even want you to wear sandals. He says, I'm sending you barefoot and broke. Why? Because they had to rely on God. They rely on people. They made friends. They stayed with people. And they learned to love people in a way that allowed them to be hurt if they weren't loved in return. And ecclesia, that's the way of Jesus. Your greatest strength, my greatest strength, is our willingness to be vulnerable with each other. That's the essence of real Christianity. And when you read the Bible well, this is what it invites us into. I got 2 more, and then we got to take communion. What I also love about Jesus is that Jesus destroys the place that all the rest of us live. He destroys the us versus them. We all want to live in this place where it's, and the church can be the worst place for it, where people come in and it's like, well, this is our people and them, and it was the secular and sacred. Anybody remember, like, everything was secular or it was sacred, right? And you realize, like, is Beethoven secular or sacred? Like, it's what's what? Like, did you know all music belongs to God? And you had to go, like, is there cereal that's Christian or non-Christian? Like, is there a right bread, say the holy bread and the non-holy bread? It's all made by God. It's all God's, and God loves it. And in this beautiful, I'm going to read you just part of it in Matthew, that one of the ways you could find out what a rabbi believed. If you were with a Jewish rabbi and you want to know, like, what do you really believe? One of the ways you could get to the heart of their core beliefs is you'd ask them, how should we pray? In fact, if I asked you to pray, I'd learn a lot about what you believed by the way you pray. And they asked Jesus this question. It was a common question to ask to a rabbi. And Jesus prays a prayer that was unlike anything anybody had ever heard. And he starts it with that, right? He says, our Father, again, what's the key word there? Our Father. All of us. Again, we get caught up on paternal language, but Jesus was in a patriarchal world, but there's places in the Bible that talk about God as mother. God defies gender. But he's saying, our parent, who's established our household that he runs for us, our Father. Back to can you give me the beginning? There we go. Let your name remain holy. Bring about your kingdom and manifest your will here on earth as it is in heaven. Already, this is what Jesus is praying, and he's already exploded people's minds. He is saying, there is a place where things are perfect. They're not perfect here, but there's a place where things are perfect, and everything is right, and all things are just. And it's not that way here, but there is a place where that is a possibility, right? And he says, bring about your kingdom, manifest your will here on earth as it is in heaven. Already Jesus is saying, isn't it good news to hear somebody say, like, the world can get better. Wouldn't it be awful if I got up to tell you, like, your best days are behind you? You peaked in high school. Isn't that the worst time to peak? Wouldn't that be awful if your best days were in high school? There is nothing hopeful about that message. What if I told you the politics of today, it's the best it's ever going to get? There will never be better presidential candidates than the two that will run this year. Would that just make you want to, that would be awful. This is what Jesus is saying. There's a place where things are perfect, and this world could be that way. If you would live this way, give us each day our daily bread. Could you be content with just what you need? No more, no less. Where you forgive us the way that we've forgiven the debts of others. Do you hear implied already that people are going to owe us and we're going to write it off? He talks about the present, then the past, the debts of the past. Then he talks about the future. And in the future, we would not be led into temptation to seek power, to pursue the wrong things. Instead, we pursue the kingdom and deliver us from evil. But let your kingdom be, and let it be powerful and glorious forever. Jesus offered a way where he said, we could actually contribute to one another. We could work together, and the world could be a better place. Ecclesia, the good news of Jesus, the good news of the Bible is good news for everyone. And then lastly, this is the one thing I want you to just hear on the way out about Jesus. The good thing about his teaching is this. It doesn't work as dogma or propaganda. If you've heard a version of Christianity that says, like, this is the right way and this is everything, like, it's just not, like, the teachings of Jesus don't actually work for that. Sean and Erica and I are going to launch into a series on parables after we finish this series of the Bible. You're going to learn more about Jesus' teaching. And one of the things you're going to notice really quickly is Jesus' teaching, like these parables, they leave it really open-ended for us to understand and gain different things from them. They're stories that teach, and they're really, really beautiful. And what we don't want to fall into, Ecclesia, is a trap where we start to treat the Bible like an object that we worship. Anybody ever been around Christians that love to fight about the Bible? By the way, there is nothing more ridiculous than fighting about the Bible. But there are a lot of people that will go, well, like, I love the Bible more than you love the Bible. Anybody ever heard that kind? And so everybody has these words of, like, my words are it's inerrant, and my words are it's inspired, and my words, and they just fire back words at each other, right? And at the end of the day, it would be like a bunch of us guys getting at the back and going, I love my wife more than you love your wife, right? Like, well, who's going to prove it? Like, I call my wife this, right? It's ridiculous. This is what you need to know. The Bible is beautiful. It's amazing. It's a gift. But it's also, right, it can be confounding unless we read it well. And so what we want to do is to do just that. What I would try to remind you, I don't have a word for what the Bible is, but this is what I'll tell you. The Bible's perfect in every way that it needs to be perfect. So, but the Bible, different places, you've got to read differently. The story I like to tell, one of the reasons I know this is I spent 10 years leading a Bible translation called The Voice. It's published by Thomas Nelson. We use it here often. A lot of churches across the globe use it. When you lead a Bible translation, your job ultimately, and I was the president of the Bible Society, was to hire scholars, Hebrew and Greek scholars, and writers that work together to translate the Bible. And there are some passages that are hard to translate. They're really hard. In fact, we had some of the best scholars on the planet, and there were words, like there's one passage in Job that all the scholars were debating. And at the end of it, I had to pull them together and decide. So I went to my favorite, I think the best Hebrew scholar on the planet, a guy named Tremper Longman. And I said, Tremper, what does this passage in Job mean? And he said, Pastor Chris, this verse either means that Job went up the mountain or Job did not go up the mountain. So that is very helpful. I'm like, do we flip a coin? Like, what do we do? It has such ancient words, right? And there are people that can be really threatened. Like, what if we, like, hey, where Job was at in the context of the story, it doesn't matter. The story is perfect in every way that it needs to be perfect. In one battle, it could say there were this many people. In the same battle in a different place, the guy was standing at a different angle, and he saw a different number of people. But it doesn't matter how many people. That's not the point of the Bible. In fact, some of those passages from history are just important historical accounts about what's happened to God's people. The things that are important, the things that matter, they're all there. And the thing that matters most is the person of Jesus. That's who we want to encounter, and that's a beautiful thing. And if you will engage with us as we walk through Lent, this is what I want to promise you. It will be transformational. The teachings of Jesus. And so I want to invite you into a few opportunities, and we're going to announce them this next week, and I don't want any of you to miss them. So I'm going to give you an opportunity so that you can make sure that you don't. I'm going to tell you about one that I'm going to lead. We're going to have a number of experiential opportunities to read and understand the Bible. We're going to do some things like Lectio Divina that are sacred reading. We're going to do some Visio Divinas. We have an amazing couple in our church that are going to lead a Taizé worship service in this room. That's a different way to worship, and it's really helpful and contemplative and will be really, really good. And I'm going to lead what I can only call a seminar that I hope will be really transformational. That's going to engage some of the things we're talking about today. I'm calling it the art of embracing our full humanity. And I'm going to invite you to an evening. Asher's going to make pizza and pasta. We'll probably have some wine. I'm going to share with you a little bit. And this is what I'm going to invite you into. Where are the places that you've taken on shame, that you believe the wrong things about yourself, that you've struggled to embrace what it means to be truly who you are? And in fact, we're going to do some things with the kids that are similar. One of the things that I read recently was that for most of us, we do a really good job of being ourselves until we're like 7 or 8. Anybody remember like 5, 6, 7? You ask a room of 5, 6, 7, like, how many of you are artists? Who's the strongest person here? Like, who's the fastest person here? And around 7 or 8, we're like, he's the smart one. She's the fast one. He's the creative one. We develop this competition and I started to wonder, and this is what we're going to unpack as adults, but I started to wonder, like, what if we told kids before they hear that, like, hey, around 7 or 8, you're going to start hearing this voice that tells you you're not a great artist. Like, that's a lie. You're going to hear this voice that tells you you're not that beautiful. You really are. That's a lie. What if we learned before we started to hear that voice that we should never listen to that voice? Can you imagine how much better our lives would be if we learned never to listen to that voice? And so now most of us are old enough, and what we got to do is unpack it, and you're going to have to lay some stuff down and then take on some new things. And I'm going to invite you in an evening. We're going to be a little bit vulnerable with each other. We're going to eat some food. We're going to share some life together, and we're going to say, what would it look like for us to really embrace who we are? And at the same time, we're going to do something with the kids where we tell the kids, like, don't ever listen to that voice no matter what, and be who you're made to be. And there are going to be a bunch of these opportunities in Lent. So this is what I want you to do. If you're not already on our newsletter that goes out every week, I want you just to scan this QR code, and you're going to get this list of things that's going to come up. So you know if you're on it, because we usually send you a couple of really great things a couple of times a week, and you get a lot of information. you're going to be able to be the first to sign up for this intimate evening of pizza and pasta and vulnerability and teaching and opportunity for both our adults and our kids. Ecclesia, this is what I want you to hear. You can experience the love and grace of Jesus just like Jean Valjean. God has offered you a grace that you can't earn and you never will. And your life can be filled with hope and promise. And it doesn't matter how old we are, the path of following Jesus is filled with adventure and beauty. And I want to be a part of living that with all of you. Will you take a moment as we come to the table, and would you allow me to pray over you in the voice that I hope you hear, the voice of the Spirit, that never says to you, you're not enough, that never says to you, but remember when you failed in this way, that never accuses you of anything. The voice of the Spirit prays over you and prays things like this, and I just would ask you to receive this prayer. You are my beloved son and daughter. You belong to me. I made you, and I know you, and here's the beauty. I know all of you, and I love you. I love every fiber of your being. I love you when you fail, and I love you when you succeed. I love the things you do and the things you put your hands to, the food that you eat, and the ways that you care for your body when you're waking or sleeping. And as you come to my table, I pray that the bread and the wine would be a reminder of my unconditional love. And I now invite you not only to receive that love, but to share that love with others. You're my beloved child. You're my friend. You are cherished. Receive and be blessed. Amen.